back to this notion then of justifying an investment in brand, specifically when you're tied to pipeline creation or pipeline development. What are some ways that brand actually has an impact on vendor consideration, and how can marketers who are considering making investments in this area actually go about building a case to do so?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, one that's always on everybody's mind, and I think there's an interesting dichotomy at play here. On one hand, I think if you talk to almost anybody, even if they're not in the advertising business, I think most people would tell you that just kind of gut reaction is that advertising works. Just setting aside the $200 billion in the U.S. that gets spent every year, the idea that if buyers see your message, they get comfortable with it, they understand it, they build trust with it. Most people would assume that that's going to give you a leg up when decision time comes around. But then, on the flip side is that it's notoriously hard to prove ROI on the brand side. So, all that being said, regardless of where you're at in the market, your goal is to make sure that next buyer is considering your product or your solution or whatever it is that you're selling. So, whether that's the startup angle where all they're looking to do is get a seat at the table, you want to make sure that people are seeing what you have to do. You're kind of figuring your way in the market and getting people to notice. Or if it's those established brands, they got to defend their turf. They got to stay on top of a heap. And then really they also need to make sure that people understand that they're, manipulating their solution as they need to address new challenges. All of that is boils down to the fact that consideration is vital, and the key tenet of a brand campaign. So then the real question is, how do you get that consideration? And there are a couple of ways. With demand gen, I think there are a couple of ways to do that. With demand gen, obviously, you have a little bit more of a narrow slice of the total addressable market you have. It's only going to be in short bursts. I think this slide we're showing now is very simple, and yet I think it's very powerful, because it does show that, I sometimes call it kind of short-termism with demand gen. It gets you front and center for a bit, but then you fall back. You're not really creating a lot of consistency. Whereas with brand advertising, it's a much more efficient way to kind of repeatedly reach buyers who might otherwise not engage with us or you. And, you can see that over time, consistently display advertising kind of builds a foundation and then increases, rather than having these, fits and starts that you see on the demand gen side. And so, at TechTarget, we found the exact same thing. That slide's from, the IPA in London, but we actually ran our own study and we found the exact same thing, which was, you can see in the data when we looked at advertisers who were kind of always on, consistently visible in the market, they actually saw a 25% bump in consideration. And again, at TechTarget, we have, we're constantly calling, we're constantly understanding exactly, what buyers are saying they're considering, who they're considering, the list. So we're looking at tangible consideration data on this stuff, and we looked at it over 2 years. So, the consistent advertisers getting a big boost. The inconsistent ones, they're kind of here or there. They might go dark for a bit. They still saw a boost, but clearly not as high. I actually think the most interesting data we got from the study was for the advertisers that weren't spending. It's not as though they're just treading water. They're not staying at zero. They're actually losing ground to all of their competitors by not advertising. So, consistency and scale, there's no question that's what matters to be driving downstream consideration with brand advertising. You just don't want to be in a scenario where you're losing ground. You want to build the foundation, and then over time, you're going to consistently build up that brand trust. You're going to engage buyers over and over again, and ultimately, that's really going to put you in a good spot when it's decision time for them.